The sweater surgery. Hello and welcome to another episode of Yarn to Table. I'm Celeste and this is a show about my knitting life, and this is the first episode of 2019. So I've been traveling for the last month, and other than some bonus content that I released in the meantime, I have been I've not been here in front of the camera since before the holidays. It is February 3rd now, I think this will go live tomorrow. So I feel a little bit rusty, so just that caveat, and I have a lot to catch you up on. I've also been thinking a lot about what I want my knitting to look like in this year and what I want this show to look like in the future. So with this episode, what I'd really like to do is up front kind of go through my just my stats and my goals from the last year, comparing my stats to the year previous, and then talk a little bit about where I'm at with my knitting and with the show. So it's going to be kind of like a chit-chat segment up front. And I want to do that up front because some of the things that I'm going to talk about there will sort of inform talking about my current work in progress and just sort of what's going on. It just, for this episode, it feels right. But before I get started, I will say that if you are not yet following me on Instagram and or Ravelry, Celeste Foal is where to find me there. And the Ravelry group, which is linked in the doobly-doo, is where you can find show notes for every episode, and those will link you to anything I talk about, and sometimes details that I don't mention, like names of colorways on projects that I'm working on and things like that. Yeah, and I think that's it. So let's get into it. So first I want to talk about the stats for basically everything that I knit in 2018 and kind of compare it to what I knit in 2017, because I did look at my stats on my year in review Podiversary Pajama Party live cast that I did last holiday season. This year I knit 4 baby things, 2 pairs of socks, a pair of booties, and a hat. And last year I knit 1 baby thing, which was a garment for a friend. I shouldn't be saying this year and last year because it's so confusing. I'm just going to say the names of the years because now it's 2019. So anyway, in 2018, I only knit 6 pairs of socks, 2 for Ryan and 4 for myself, which included 1 pair of shorties and 1 pair of knee-highs, versus 2017 where I knit 16 pairs of socks. So 2017 was a big sock knitting year, and a big reason that I cut back this year was because I already had so many pairs of hand knit socks that I could wear them every year, so there was less motivation to be constantly pushing out new pairs. However, there's still something that I love to wear, as you can see, or that I love to knit. So as you can see, I've still been knitting them at a rate of about 1 pair every 2 months. In 2018, I knit 1 pair of slippers. I knit 2 pair in 2017, and I've actually already knit another pair in 2019, which I will show you later. In 2018, I knit 4 hats. 2 were for Ryan and 2 were for myself. In 2017, I knit 6. 2018, I knit 1 cowl and 1 wrap. In 2017, similarly, I knit a cowl and a scarf. But in 2017, I knit 5 shawls, and in 2018, I did not knit any shawls at all, 0. Big part of this, you will see, is because I put so much into garment knitting. That was my focus this year. So for ornamental things, decorative things, in 2018 I wove 3 wall hangings and knit 1 ornament, and in 2017 I knit 2 stuffies, 2 stockings, 2 ornaments, and 3 progress keepers. So some smaller things and a little bit more in the way of decorative items. Here we go though. In 2018 I knit 11 garments, so nearly 1 for every month of the year, and in 2017 I knit 7, so I almost doubled my garment making, which of course are pretty big items, so that's awesome. And then the total number of items in 2018 I knit 33 versus 53 in 2017, so about 20 fewer items. And again, if you look at those stats, it makes total sense because it's like more garments, less tiny little ornaments for the tree and that kind of thing. Although I also do think that it's true that I probably put in less hours, fewer hours in general in 2018. So I think my knitting was slightly less, but also more focused. And all of the items that I knit this past year were for myself, except for the 4 baby knits and Ryan's 2 pairs of socks and 2 hats. So in 2017 there was a lot more gift knitting going on, not a ton, but certainly a lot more compared to where I'm at now, where I knit almost exclusively for myself. And if I'm not knitting for myself, I'm probably knitting for my husband or my future child, which is basically just for me also. So there's something that's changed over the years. And I think that comes down to, again, like having, when you have less time to knit or you're getting more focused on, I think I'm becoming more of a product knitter and less of a process knitter. And so it makes sense that I'm sort of prioritizing those things that I want to knit for myself versus where I used to be in the past when I would just kind of knit because I felt like knitting and I didn't even really care that much what the final item was, and then I would just give it to someone. So that's something that's happening in my knitting life evolution over the years that definitely shows up when you look at the stats. I did set a few goals for myself, which I talked about in the Year in Review podcast last holiday season. So these were goals for 2018. And I actually met most of the serious ones. There were some sort of I think as I stated them at the time, they weren't so much goals as they were kind of thoughts or nice to haves or things that maybe I would get around to that year, but were also more long-term goals. So I'll get into that. So I made a goal to knit at least 6 garments. Garments were my big priority. I wanted to knit at least 6. I wanted to always have a garment on the needles, and I wanted to use a stashed sweaters quantity for half of the garments. In other words, anytime I bought a sweaters quantity to knit a garment, I wanted to also knit a garment with a sweaters quantity that I already had in my stash. And I accomplished all of that. The goal was to knit 6 garments, so 1 for every 2 months. I knit 11, so almost double the goal. I always had one on the needles, and of the 11, I actually knit 6 of them with stashed sweaters quantities, so slightly more than my goal of half. So really proud of that. Those are my goals that I stayed focused on and wanted to accomplish, and like were my serious goals for the year, and I did, so that kind of feels amazing. That being said, my far reach goals did not do so great there. I wanted to make a sweater for my mother. I did not make her anything at all in this entire calendar year. Just not great. Wait, that's a lie. That's a lie because I made her that wrap. Oh my gosh, I was like tired when I wrote these notes. Oh, okay, I made her something this year. It was not a sweater, but I did make her something. Okay, I gotta fix that in the notes. Phew, I was feeling really bad about that. She's a very knit-worthy person. So revise what I said about I knit everything for myself except my mother, my husband, and my future baby, all of whom are extensions of myself because I love them very much. Okay, so I made my mom a wrap. I also wanted to dye more yarn this past year. I did not dye yarn. I thought I might try Fair Isle, meaning not stranded, but actual Fair Isle. Did not do that. And I wanted to design at least one knitting pattern, which I did at least start working on. So that's more than nothing. Yeah. So there you go. But those were all stretch goals. So overall, I feel good about it. Now, I want to talk about how I see things shaping up for 2019. And that starts with my main goal or focus for the year. Last year it was all about garments. This year I do intend to continue knitting garments. Maybe not quite at the rate that I was last year, because my main goal, and I don't know exactly how to say this because it's not a resolution in that it's like a hard and fast in stone thing. It's more a focus, and it's monogamous knitting. Let's just take that in for a minute. I know it's a little scary. Okay, so before the new year, I was watching Katie Green. Her Green Bean podcast is one of my absolute favorites. And she was talking about how she was really overwhelmed by the number of whips that she had. And when she would get stressed, she would cast on something new to make herself feel better. And then she would start to feel guilty because she had too many things going. And that she wanted to experiment with monogamous knitting in the new year. And when she said it, it just clicked in my head that that was something I wanted to do, that it was something that I'd been thinking about for a while and I've been really scared of. And I think I was scared because I was scared that I was going to come out and say, like, line in the sand, I will not have multiple whips this entire year. This is what I'm doing. And then if I made any concessions to that, or if I didn't like it, or if it failed somehow, that like I was a failure or a liar or whatever. And part of what you have to understand to get like my warped psychology about stuff like this is, I know people have been talking on YouTube recently about Gretchen Rubin and the Four Tendencies. Volenvine, Kristen on Volenvine has talked about it, and Emily on Slow Fashion Rebel. I also am a fan. I've read all of Gretchen's books and been listening to Happier since the beginning. And so I do think a lot about the Four Tendencies, which is this framework for just basically how you are motivated by things. It's all about how you respond to external and internal expectations. And I'm an upholder, and sorry, Ryan just like opened a soda really loudly and then sneezed really loudly. Anyway, I'm an upholder, and the thing about upholders is we respond to both outer and inner expectations, and essentially we can be kind of rigid and have trouble have trouble setting boundaries and not responding if there is an expectation, whether it's inner or external. So like, it's really hard for me to stop reading a book if I start it, even if I'm not digging it at all, because it just feels like you started it, you should finish it. Like, no one is actually expecting that of me, and even I myself think that my time would be better spent if I quit that book and moved on to a different book that I'm enjoying more. And yet there's this like invisible wall of pressure that I feel. And that's just the way that my own personal brain works. And some people are like that and some people aren't. So the way that I am with things like resolutions is if I lay it down like it's a serious thing I'm going to do, I know that that is going to feel really serious to me, and I'm not going to be able to just blow it off later. So I don't make resolutions easily. I don't do exactly what Katie does in terms of casting on things to make myself feel better. I don't have trouble with having a ton of whips going necessarily. Where I find a lot of stress is my queue and my plans for the future. And I think I've talked about this a little bit on the show before, but I find myself getting excited about what I want to knit next. And instead of letting myself cast it on, I just plan to knit it next. And then when I'm done with, the amount of whips that I'm working on, that I've allowed myself to start something new, like I've finished a sweater, I can start a new sweater, something like that, although I still maybe have a couple other things going at the same time. Once I get to that point, I then feel like I need to make the thing that I've planned to make, even though at that point I might not be as excited about it anymore and I might be more excited about something else. So I end up in this situation where I'm never casting on the thing that I'm actually excited about. I'm always casting on the thing that has been in the lineup, on deck, assigned to be the next thing, that because I was excited about it like 2 months ago. And I also spend a lot of my time kind of stressing about those long-term plans and going, oh, if I don't finish this yet, I'm not going to have enough time to knit that other thing before the weather changes. And I just spend way too much time caught up in the future and my anxiety over that, and not just enjoying what I'm working on right now, which is also exactly the way that I get about my life generally. But there's just this microcosm of it in my knitting. And knitting is supposed to be fun and relaxing. It's not supposed to be a microcosm of the anxiety that, plagues the rest of your life. So when I started to think about monogamous knitting, I realized that what it would mean for me is you work on the project that you're working on. You never have to waste brain space thinking about what am I going to work on tonight. Shouldn't I, those shoulds where you're really into one project, but you really should finish that other project that you've been neglecting. I don't have to waste brain space feeling guilty. I'm either working on the project, or I'm not, and I'm not knitting, or I'm frogging it because I'm not into it. Like, those are the options. I thought that might be nice. Additionally, when I finished an object, I would not have an official cue. I might have dream knitting, and as you'll see later, I'm changing I'm changing the topic on the horizon to dream knitting, because instead of being about what I'm planning to knit next, I just want it to be about the things that I'm sort of dreaming of, that I would like to be casting on, but I'm not, the kind of vicarious knitting. So while I'm knitting on my monogamous project, I do not put plans in stone for what I'm going to knit next. And then when I finish, I have a fresh moment of living in the actual moment, in the actual now, and at that time I get to ask myself, hey, there's nothing on the needles. What in the world would you love to cast on the most? And I get to actually cast on in that moment the thing that I'm excited to cast on. So I thought, what if I try that? What if I try that as an experiment and see if it makes me happier? Not, let me make this my resolution and I have to do it no matter what, but let me make this an experiment. What if that was what I did in the new year? So I had this thought maybe like a week and a half before the end of the year. And I decided that what I would need to do for knitting monogamy is finish up the whips that I had. So I finished this sweater, which I'll talk about later, and my Zweig, which I'll talk about later. I picked up another sweater which needed some knitting surgery, because I thought, as long as I need to do that knitting surgery, that's going to be in the back of my mind. That's going to feel like an obligation and a whip. So I finished that up. I finished all of my whips except for my Cozy Memories blanket, which is not so much a whip as like an ongoing memory project, where when I knit other projects, I then take specifically the yarn I used from those and knit squares into it. So it's not really an ongoing thing that you can finish up. And I don't think of it like a whip, and it doesn't occupy my real estate in my mind that way. So that can be an exception. And I let my Beekeeper's quilt be an exception in that it's something that's in hibernation where I'm not actively working on it, but I'm not going to go and frog all of the hexapuffs or throw them away or anything. It's sort of just on pause. And in the future, I might decide to make it my project. And if I do, I think I will have to do it in a monogamous way. I don't think that it's like the Cozy Memories blanket where I can kind of just add to it as I go. I think I either neglect it or I work on it. And so right now it's just in hibernation. And one day, if it really is the thing that I want to cast on that I want to come back to, I will start making hexapuffs, and those will have to be my monogamous project that I'm focused on, and then I will finish that. That's how I think I want to do that one. So that's set aside. The Cozy Memories doesn't count. I frogged a couple things that were in hibernation that I did not feel like getting back to. Things that you probably won't even remember because they're from so long ago, like a pair of Felici socks that I didn't feel like coming back to because I don't love working with that base, and the stranded OWL mittens, which are beautiful, but which, like, I just was not feeling, and I could see myself casting them on again in the future, but for now, they're just going to be frogged. And I worked through all the whips. And I am currently working through the last of those whips, which is my northeasterly, which I'll show you in my whip segment. Exceptions are that my design project, which is the shawl that I'm designing inspired by whales with the Welsh yarn that I got while I was there. It's kind of a different animal, and I think that what's going to happen with it is maybe it will end up being my monogamous project at some point, much like the Beekeeper's quilt, where it's just kind of set aside right now, and maybe I'll bring it in. I could also see it might work with the way my brain works, that at some point I just start kind of knitting on it as its own project because designing feels separate enough from knitting regularly that maybe I can balance those. I don't know. I worked on it a little bit over the holidays. I actually frogged what I had and restarted. And then I set it aside again. Working on it is not the same thing as knitting for me. It occupies a different part of my brain, and it's not relaxing. It's enjoyable and very creative and fun, but I feel like it kind of exists in its own world. And the other exception, as you'll see, is I have cast on and knit the very beginning of a vanilla sock, simply because with my current whip, it does not work as a portable project very well, simply because it's a blanket with a bunch of different mini skeins, and I found myself trying to make it work as a portable project, and it did not work out very well when I took it to Cambridge that way, and I wanted to have something when I went to Portugal. Now, it turned out that I barely knit at all on the plane or otherwise because I was so exhausted the whole time, so I have like the tiny beginning of a sock. It's nothing. I thought about even frogging it. But for right now, I'm okay with it just sort of sitting there. It's not stressing me out. So I might frog it, or I might decide that I have this exception where I also have a vanilla sock going with whatever I'm working on, and that's just my like on-the-go knitting. Maybe that's going to work out to have as just a separate thing where you have your on-the-go knitting and then you have your project that you dedicate your time to. Or maybe that's not going to work for me and I do need to be fully monogamous. I don't know. So all of these things I'm still kind of experimenting with and figuring out, because I didn't want to write exact rules around it. I wanted to find out what it was that would make me happy, and so I have to experiment to kind of figure out what the rules are rather than setting them arbitrarily and then feeling like I have to follow them. So, I know that's a lot, and I hope that's interesting for you guys to hear like where I'm at with that. But that's sort of what my knitting life is going to look like moving forward. And because of that, it started me on thinking what this show is going to look like moving forward. So if I don't have a ton of different whips going on, and I'll be knitting at, I don't know what rate. Right, lately I have been traveling and I've not been knitting very well. I've not been knitting a lot, and so it's possible that in the future, like I guess I want to be open to, first of all, a schedule that is based on my actual knitting life versus trying to base my knitting life around the schedule of this show. So I don't want to say I'm going to be here every 2 weeks and then end up feeling the pressure to like finish a project so that I have something to show you. Rather, I want to knit at my own pace and what makes me happy, and then have an episode when I have something to show you. So that's one thing. Another thing is that something I have kind of wanted to do from the beginning is open this up to be about slightly other aspects of my creative life, things that are either tangentially related to knitting or really just more other ways that I create. So I write and I cook, and I have been at various times in my life, including right now, wearing capsule wardrobes. And these are all things that I think could be interesting to share as little mini segments, maybe. The reason that I named the show Yarn to Table is because I kind of wanted the potential to share cooking as something that could be part of this, because in my mind it's all these sort of like homey crafty things. But when I first started doing the show, I didn't feel comfortable just coming in and having my own format. I felt like, oh, no one's going to care about anything but yarn. I want to just establish a audience of people who care about knitting, and that's why I started this whole new channel when I had another channel that was about minimalism, but I didn't want to subject that audience to all the yarn talk, and I was afraid I couldn't build an audience here if I didn't stay focused on something that everyone shared as a passion, that was knitting, and if I went off on these different tangents. I didn't really have the confidence to just come in and say, this is going to be about my whole creative life and what it looks like. Now, that being said, lately I've been watching The Green Bean again, huge inspiration. And the way that she does her show is she has these interstitial moments of her walking with her dog out on the moors in the national park near where she lives, and she shares her illustration, which is the primary creative part of her life. It's what she does for a living, much like me. So she illustrates professionally, and then she illustrates on the side as like her passion, and that's sort of what I do. I write for a living, and I also write as a creative process. Writing, I think, is a little harder to share in this kind of format than illustration, and I'm not sure exactly what form that would take, but I want to share with you what I'm reading. Sometimes I want to share with you what my writing process feels like, at least, if not my actual writing. And food, and foraging for mushrooms, and any other creative things that I do. So what I'm trying to say, in a long-winded way, is watching Katie Green, I mean, I don't know anything about illustration, and I would not have sought out a show that was specifically about illustration, but because her show is about knitting and illustration, I find myself completely captivated because I'm interested in her, and I like that it's her own sort of authentic format that's about what her creative life looks like, and it's a mixture of things. I love that, and I don't know exactly what I want this to look like or what I have time to do. I don't see myself spending a bunch more time on this, setting up in my kitchen to have a little segment and have it be edited perfectly into this, and like part of this is It's casual. I can just sit here and talk. It only takes up the amount of time that it takes up, and that's the amount of room in my life that I have for it. So I'm not saying like, hey, I'm going to come back and I'm going to have these like perfectly little edited segments and it's going to be like Martha Stewart and suddenly I'm going to be over here, gardening, and then I'm going to be back over here knitting, and it's all going to look like some perfect little collage of my life. So I don't have time for that right now. I don't have time to, that would be beautiful, but I don't have time to make that. What I am saying is I am considering, in a kind of casual way, maybe having segments here and there as they come up naturally, that, will be me sharing a favorite recipe there in my kitchen, talking about how I cook, or, hunting for morels in the spring, and maybe it's kind of a vlog and it's me and Ryan, and we're taking you along with us, and then we make some risotto, like, it might be something like that. That's something I'm open to, and that's something that there might be more space for if the knitting monogamy makes the traditional way that I've been doing this show less viable. So these are all just still questions at this point. It's not an exact plan. It's something that's evolving, much like my knitting monogamy plan is evolving. But I'm excited about it. So let me know your thoughts on all of that, because I would really like to hear anything that you have to say about what would resonate for you with the show going forward, and all that kind of thing, and I'll take it into consideration. So moving along, it is time to get into the regular content and share what I have finished and what I've been working on. So the first FO is what I'm wearing right now, which is my Weekender pattern by Andrea Mallory. I did this in her suggested yarn, which is the Brooklyn Tweed Shelter Marl, although I did the newsprint colorway, so more of a black than the gray narwhal colorway that she knit her sample in. And I have talked about this a lot in the past, so I don't want to talk about it a ton more, except to say that I did a nice little modification that I quite like. I kept noticing when I saw other people wearing their Weekenders that the slash neck was quite wide, and wide enough that it seemed like it was showing bra straps. And I thought if I could help it and it was still comfortable and pretty, I would like mine to be in a little bit so that it did not show my bra strap. So I just did that by kind of looking at how the pattern was working, and there's this point where you're leaving on a certain number of stitches, and then you are binding off with a sewn tubular bind off the stitches in the middle, and you're leaving these in reserve to do a 3-needle bind off to join the shoulders. And so I just kind of looked at that, estimated what might be right. I did it once where I made it too small and I had to rip it out and try again. Such is the situation when you are kind of making up your own thing. But what I ended up doing, I think it was a pretty small modification. I think I maybe ended up making the entire thing like 4 stitches smaller, something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers anymore, sorry. And it worked great. I think it looks nice. I prefer it, and it's not too tight from getting over my head or anything like that. The bind off is this tubular, so it's not too tight. It's not super stretchy, but it's not too tight of a bind off. So I'm really, really happy with that modification, and I would make the same modification if I were to make this sweater again. And I really might make this sweater again because I love the shape of it and I really enjoyed knitting it. And there are many other colors that I would enjoy having it in. And I also think that it might be quite pretty with, as much as I love this yarn, this is actually my very favorite base of yarn that I love knitting with. But I think something a little drapier, like maybe with some alpaca in there, or maybe a full-on alpaca. I don't know. I don't work a ton with alpaca, so I'm not sure whether it would be better with a blend or what. But something with a drapier yarn and this sort of boxy, as you can see, like drop shoulder look, I think would be really, really, really pretty. So that's something I might, if I want to make another one, I might consider just looking at other people's projects and seeing what other drapier yarn bases are out there and how they look in people's photos, because that's something nice about Ravelry, that you can sort of see what other people have done. Then, as I mentioned, I went and I finished up all my whips, so which I was quite close to finishing this one as well. I think I just had the sleeves. So this is my beautiful Zweig, my rustic Zweig, as I call it lovingly, to show its quite unique distinction from the majority of the Zweigs out there. Because it is knit in Shetland Spindrift for the body, and Mad Fuzzy Pretty Tough. So it is all 100% non-super washable, but in addition to that, it's actually quite rustic woolly wool. It's not as soft as this Brooklyn tweed. I love this. I love how the lace blocked up, the way that it fits me. It sits sort of just here. So I wear it with a flesh-colored tank top underneath, and that's kind of perfect amount of modesty for the lace without actually showing through. Like, you don't notice that the tank top is there, but it just feels a little bit more modest. And yeah, the sleeves ended up a little bit tight because I was knitting them magic loop, and you know, I've never noticed before my gauge being significantly tighter on magic loop. So I've traditionally never sized up my needles when I go and I do the sleeves in magic loop. It's just not a thing that I've noticed. But for some reason, it really was a thing here. So the sleeves do not so much have that nice big blousey look that that some of the others do. And you know, part of that might be just the fact that the yarn did not bloom and stretch as much as the superwash that most people were knitting theirs with. But it also, the row gauge specifically was definitely shorter on the sleeves, to the extent that I thought I might have somehow messed up and been knitting not as many rows between the little cable X's. I thought maybe I'd messed that up because I was counting the number of cable X's and the sleeve was coming up so much shorter than the body. But when I got in there and I counted the rows, it was the same number of rows. They were just squidged up. Yeah, so I don't know. It must be the magic loop. I don't know why. I've never noticed that before or had a problem with that before, but it ended up being fine. Basically, just the sleeves are more fitted than in the design, but they're not too fitted because in the design they're quite blousy, so it's fine, you know. Yeah, I was worried about it and I thought I was going to have to rip back the first sleeve. I took some time and I might have even blocked it. I can't remember anymore. This was a while ago. But yeah, it took some time deciding if I was going to rip it out, redo it, and trying to diagnose the problem, trying to figure out if it was my tension or if I had screwed up and knit too few rows in between the cables or what was going on. But in the end, it all actually worked out. So this guy is lovely. I have been wearing it a little bit. It's funny. The the sort of toothiness of the yarn. So it doesn't bother me. I don't think that it's too scratchy or uncomfortable. It's not as comfortable as some softer yarns, you know, but it's fine. Like, it doesn't, I don't feel uncomfortable when I wear it, or like I can't wait to get it off at the end of the day, the way that I can't wait to get off, you know, like my bra. Like, I'm not like, get this wool off me. I'm comfy in it. But as I've been wearing it, I've started to notice a different issue that I'd never thought about with yarn that is just this level toothy, this like Shetland level toothy, which is that I started to be insecure about what other people might think if they were to feel it. And when I interrogated that, I realized that what it came down to is, I know that hand knits have a reputation for being misshapen and scratchy and horrible, and you know, people have this idea that wool is scratchy and gross, and I thought, if I'm wearing this out, you know, at work or something, and someone touches my shoulder and feels how toothy it is, and they don't like the feeling of it, or it's not as soft as they expected it to be, or it's sort of jarring to them that it's so rough, I don't want them to then assume that like all hand knits are that way, or that I'm knitting like out of some crappy low quality like wool, or that like, you know, like that I'm somehow compromising, that my hand knits are not exactly what I want to be wearing, and that I am like just making do with this really, really scratchy, horrible wool for some reason. Like, it's such a bizarre train of thoughts that I would be anxious about something like that, but I found that I have been. When I wear it, I am like, for some reason, like on alert about someone touching it and then like making assumptions that aren't true about the wool and about hand knits in general. I just want to like rep hand knits as a wonderful, beautiful thing that everyone loves, and because I know that this wool isn't for everyone, it's like it makes me anxious that people would make assumptions that this is like representative of all wool. Is that insane? Does that even make sense? Anyway, because of that, I think that is the only thing that would hold me back in the future from doing more garments that are this level toothsome. For mitts and things, I don't think it would hold me back. And certainly anything that is like all over color work, like if I do a Fair Isle sweater, I will probably do it with Jamison's. And I love Jamison's. And I love this sweater. But I think that as I've been wearing it, that is something that I didn't anticipate feeling. That is like a slight downside of wearing something this toothsome. It's just the I don't know, just like I'm not as confident rocking it as I thought I would be in a non-knitter environment. Around knitters, I would be confident rocking it because I'm like, I don't care if you like it or you prefer something softer. You're not going to make assumptions about. It's like I just don't. I just want to rep wool, and I want people to love it, and I just don't want people to like write it off as scratchy, and it's very dear to my heart, and so I get like preemptively nervous about things like that, which is probably certifiably insane. But maybe you can relate. Who knows? Let me know if you can. Okay. The sweater surgery. You guys, the sweater surgery. God, I have so much to talk about this week. I'm getting like this week, like I've been here last week. You know what I'm saying, this episode. The sweater surgery. Okay, long story as short as possible. This is the Ostra. I test knit it for Melody Hoffman. Because it was a test knit, we discovered that ideally for some of the bust sizes, you might want to have you might want to start, it was bottom up, and you might want to start this 2-color linen stitch a little bit lower so that you have a little bit longer of a section here to get over the bustier girls that some of us have. That is just the situation when you are test knitting. Sometimes, the pattern isn't all fixed yet, and you might end up with an imperfect product. So, not mad at it, but that was the situation. I was dealing with a sweater where the original fringe line was up here, and it just wasn't perfect. It was just a little bit, if I raised my arms, it would start to come up above my breast level, and even when I had my arms down, it wasn't as far down as I wanted it to be. It was just slightly below, and I wanted it to really be on that like pure waistline space. So what I ended up deciding doing, and I know that I've talked about the various things that I considered doing and how I knew it needed to be surgery. I've talked about that on a past episode, so if you want more of that, you can go look at that. But I did conclude that what I was going to do was cut into it and then pick up and knit more linen stitch in the reverse direction, and then Kitchener the whole thing back together and add the fringe. So on Instagram there is a photo of this in 2 pieces where I've cut into it completely before I've Kitchenered it back together and added the fringe again. But yeah, I ended up doing that, and it was one of the most challenging things I have ever done, because picking up invisibly and knitting in the other direction in 2-color brioche stitch turns out not a thing. Can't do it. You will probably notice this line of imperfection right here. Now it turns out that non-knitters and people who don't know they're looking for it, they don't see it at all. I have tried to point it out to people and they've insisted they can't see it. But you guys can probably see it, and Ryan can see it because he was helping me as I was going, and I needed another opinion. I would hold it up and be like, better or worse, better or worse. Is this... Basically what I did was I picked up, I knit in the opposite direction, and then I came back in and I did a bunch of duplicate stitch to try to disguise that seam. And so with the duplicate stitch, what ended up happening is you couldn't actually get the duplicate stitch perfect, because if you duplicated exactly what it should look like on one row, it would mess up the next row, because there was this mirror image thing happening where you really can't do 2-color linen in 2 directions and have them come together seamlessly. They come together with a sort of mirror image that draws attention to itself. So I had to kind of split that difference by improvising with the linen stitch and just sort of doing a bit of black where it seemed like there needed to be black to trick the eye and create this kind of, optical illusion, basically. I was just in this crazy MC Escher situation where when you would we would fix one row and the next row would get screwed up. And so it was a lot of trial and error with the duplicate stitch, and all of that was after I had done the labor of picking up and knitting in the other direction, which was also difficult. And I did that as seamlessly as I could, but it still was a visible join because, as I said, they came together as a mirror image, and it just wasn't perfect. So where I ended up getting to is, in my opinion, as close to invisible as was possible to get, given this situation. And I feel good about that. I didn't want to be lazy about it. I didn't want to be like, oh, well, good enough. But when I got to a point where I realized that adding more duplicate stitch was not going to make it any more invisible because of just the limitations of what this design does when you go in 2 directions with it, I ended up just kind of having to accept the limitations that were naturally there and do as good as I could. And I think it's pretty darn good. I feel good about wearing it. I don't feel uncomfortable or like it draws attention to I don't feel like people notice that line. So it was something that I did in a couple days. It took a lot of time and a lot of energy, mental and emotional. But I was crazy proud when I finished. I was crazy proud, and I feel like it's so worth it to make this a sweater that I really enjoy wearing, because it's a really special sweater. It's knit out of my favorite yarn, the same as this, the Brooklyn Tweed Shelter. It's designed by one of my favorite designers and friends, and it's just freaking beautiful. I am completely in love with the look. And so this is the kind of thing where it's like, this is where I'm becoming more of a product knitter than I ever was, because that whole process was not fun. It was not fun, but it was what this sweater deserved in order to be a beautiful sweater that I wanted to have in my wardrobe. And I think I'm just thinking more and more that way about just really making the things that I knit, the garments that I knit especially, I don't just think of them as fun projects as much anymore. I think of them as things that I'm choosing with a lot more intention, and that I'm really putting time into and taking the time to make them something that really sparks joy for me, if you will. So yeah, super proud of that sweater surgery. That was something I did in the week after Christmas when I had a whole week off work, and so it was such a luxury to be able to, that was also the week I think when I ripped back and restarted my shawl design. Just a real luxury to have some extra time there to do that, and I'm really glad I did. So the final FO to show is something that you haven't seen at all before, and it's a new pair of simple house slippers. I have been wearing some simple house slippers that I made out of Stroll Glimmer that I helped double to get DK weight about a year ago, and I loved them. I wore them a lot in bed when I was cozied up, but they wore out fairly quickly, you know, way quicker than I thought they were going to. They were getting real ratty, and I decided to throw them out. And then just before I left for Cambridge, I realized that I really, really wanted to have a pair of house slippers in Cambridge for when I was, you know, hanging out in my room at night, and you know, it's chilly there, and I really, really wanted some. So I cast these on quickly and knit them up. I think both of them in the same day. I think like the day before I left, something like that. I kind of went a little nuts because I was like packing and like also trying to knit slippers at the same time, but I really wanted to have them. So I think I made a better yarn choice this time in terms of the longevity of the slippers. I chose Madeline Tosh Work Sock, and this is left over from my Tecumseh. It is this, whoops. It's a beautiful, beautiful colorway called Bittersweet. Sort of has this oil slick quality of like reading as black, but having all these colors in it. And the base, it's called Work Sock. It's actually a sport base, but it's really more like a DK. I used it for the Tecumseh and for this, which are both DK patterns. And so there's a couple thoughts. First of all, I've heard that the Work Sock holds up like a beast. And then also, I was thinking, even though what I used before was sock yarn, so it had nylon in it, because I was holding it double, essentially what you get with that is it's like unplied. You have these two plies, but they're unplied, right? Because they're not actually twisted together, they're held double. And so naturally that's just not going to be as strong. It's not going to be as durable, that's the word I'm looking for, as yarn that is just already a DK weight and has been plied properly. So I thought going with something that was already DK weight instead of doubling fingering weight was going to make them more durable, and I think it will. I've worn them a bit, you can probably tell, and they've already been through the wash once. I usually wash them just because they start to stretch out and it helps them to scrunch up again. But yeah, they're getting some pills and stuff and some fuzziness. And who knows, maybe they will be completely trashed in a year, just like the first pair were. But hopefully they hold up a little bit longer. And I really, really love this color, so I've just been enjoying the heck out of these. So that brings me to the end of finished objects, and it's time to share my work in progress with you, which is the Northeasterly. You've seen the beginning of this on my last episode, and I haven't made a ton of progress since then, I'll be honest. As I said, I have not been knitting much as I've been traveling. I tried to make this my project in Cambridge, but I ended up just not knitting as much as I usually do, partially because it wasn't as easy as a sort of on-the-go item as a sock would be, because I was changing yarn all the time, but also I was just tired and focused on other things and just not feeling the need to be knitting in every moment. I was spending a lot of downtime reading instead of knitting, and then on the plane, you know, and in Portugal, I mean, on the plane I was so freaking tired. I was like not feeling it, so I barely got any knitting there done too as well. But I've made some progress, and I am still enjoying the heck out of it. I'll be honest, I'm pretty much ready for it to be over and to move on to something new, because I have not cast on anything new in about a month now, I guess, since I did these. And then before that, it's been a while. So I'm excited to get to the end of this and have, as I said, my moment where I get to decide what's next. Really excited about that. But in the meantime, I've just been enjoying all of these beautiful yarns and just having something that's a very relaxing project. It's very mindless. Really the only thing you have to think about is playing with color, and that's something that's been nice for me, is to just kind of open up and be improvisational in that way. And my sort of like guidelines for how I do it is I basically alternate a shorter and a longer section for the most part, although they're not exact in their measurements. Then on the next row I start with the longer one and then shorter one. And this is just so that the joins don't exactly line up, so that it all stays a little bit disjointed. And then sometimes I put in these really small little sections every now and then, so you can see there and there. And I try to choose yarns each time that will contrast enough that you can tell that I've changed yarn. But I have to compromise there a little bit, because my selection of yarns, there are a few things that are like very different and stand out. You know, they're darker, but most of them are things that kind of blend and fade together more. So I can't just always choose a dramatic change, because if I always choose a dramatic change, I will run out of my bold pops of color, and then I'll still have like half of the baby blanket left to do. So kind of trying to balance that, just keeping in mind all the colors that I have. Yeah, so I don't think I have anything else to say about that. I'm still weaving in my ends as I go, although I did have some brain farts here and there where I completely forgot to, but then I went and I wove them in. So I just have my ends at my beginnings and my ends. I have my ends at my beginnings and my ends. Yep. Just going to go ahead and not correct that. You know what I mean. Top and the bottom. And then everything else is just already woven in as I go, which is pretty awesome. Yeah. And there is a knit along going on for this right now on Melissa's channel. if you are working on it or if you're thinking about working on it, check that out. She is Skananigans. And that brings me to dream knitting, the new segment, dream knitting. Formerly on the horizon, but it has a new purpose now and a new thought behind it, which is just some of the things that I am thinking I might one day knit, or that I dream about knitting, but no promises. So the first thing that I want to share in dream knitting is this new acquisition, which is from the Quince & Co. Club. I went ahead and I signed up for this because, you know, yarn clubs and pattern clubs can be hit or miss, but I thought I love Quince & Co. so much, and it would be delightful just to kind of have the surprise of whatever comes in the mail once a season, just as something to kind of get me out of my head again and all of my sort of planning and my usual routine, and kind of bring in an element of surprise and possibility to my knitting life. So the pattern for the winter, they do a large and a small item. I don't think the large is ever a garment. I think it's like a giant shawl or something, or maybe a blanket. I did the small one. And the small one this month was still 2 skeins of lace weight. So they're 50-gram skeins, I think. Are they? Yeah, they're 50-gram skeins, 305 yards of lace weight yarn. And this is their new base, Piper, which is 50% super kid mohair and 50%. It's half and half, super kid mohair and super fine merino. And then you also, so you choose if you want large or small kit, and you also choose if you want from 2 different color stories. And so I chose the sort of warmer, there's like a warmer and a cooler color story. I chose the warmer, and of course it came in my very favorite color in the world, other than gray, which is this soft pink. So very thrilled with that, and it just feels yummy. It's just magical. And then the pattern is this, I'm trying to find the name of it. It's this cowl, Agni cowl, and it's got these sort of lovely all over cables. And then as you can see, you can wear it long or double it up. Or possibly that's just a shorter version. Not sure. I have not read the whole pattern yet. But anyway, this is something beautiful that I've been daydreaming about that could potentially be the next thing I knit. Another thing I've been daydreaming about, I still have some sweaters quantities of yarn, and some of them have exact plans of what I bought them to be, and some of the time those plans change. So I bought a sweaters quantity of Knit Picks Capra, which is their cashmere merino blend. Really lovely base. I'm a big fan. Really affordable cashmere blend. DK weight yarn. And I purchased it it's a solid black, and I purchased it with one sweater in mind, the puff sleeve cardi. The more I have thought, although I love this pattern, but the more that I've thought about wanting to kind of be more intentional about what I make and how these things fit into my wardrobe, I realized that it probably wasn't something that I would get a lot of wear out of, although I would love it. It's this short sleeve cardigan, and there's only so many things you can layer that over, and I don't even have a lot of camis in my wardrobe, and it just didn't feel like it fit into the way that I dress now. So I started thinking about what else I could do with the yarn. Now the yarn is technically a sweaters quantity, but it's a pretty small sweaters quantity because, like I said, it was this short sleeve, negative ease, I think even, cardigan. So not a lot of yardage there. So I basically got on Ravelry and I looked up DK patterns that would be within the amount of yardage that I had. And what I found was this top that I had favorited a while ago called the Frenchie by Amy Apple. You might know her for her cute little turbans that she does, which I've talked about on the show before. And it's this lovely little negative ease tee with puff sleeves, again puff sleeves, and little baubles all over, tiny little baubles all over the sleeves and the top of the bodice. It's very vintage, it's very cute. I think it would be really, really chic in solid black, which is what I have. And I think it could be just a really great top, especially in the spring, which is part of why it's on the brain right now, because I think it could be fun to make and wear in the springtime. So that's something I've been thinking about. Other things that I've been thinking about are potential projects to make with some retro Zaria yarn I picked up while I was at their store in Lisbon last week. So I would love to take some time and talk more about Portugal, and maybe there will be time for that at a later date. I did another visual diary like I did for Wales, which might be something that I could share on the show at some point. And maybe I'll talk more about Portugal then, but obviously I just had so much to get through in this episode that the chit chat segment was kind of about something else, and I don't want to keep you here all day or be here all day, so hopefully we can have a rain check on that, but I'll share some of the yarn and talk about the dream knitting. So this was something I picked up. This is their Donegal Tweed base fingering weight, and it's a single ply. And yeah, just look at the blend in that color. Oh, fell in love with it. I went rogue. I usually only buy things when I have specific plans for them. But at Retro Zaria, they were so sweet, and their yarn is so beautiful, and I didn't have specific plans, and I really just wanted to support them, so I just bought a couple things that I felt drawn to, and I knew that the yarn could guide me later. I'm not usually like that with yarn shops. I don't feel like I need to buy things, but I just felt so... I felt really taken in and cared for, and just like I really wanted to support that shop. And also their yarn is really, really, really special, and it's not the kind of thing that you can just find anywhere. And yeah, I could have ordered it online later, and I've ordered it online before, but it was making me happy, so it came home. So yeah, so these I think could be a vintage prim hat, which is something I have been wanting to knit for a long time. I've cast on and ripped out in the past when I used some other actually similar colorway that turned out to be labeled as fingering weight, but really was heavier. So I think these could be lovely as a vintage prim, which is a kind of brioche and cabled hat by Andrea Mowry. I've always wanted to do, and yeah, I think that's probably what they're going to be. And then I got a bunch of the Mondim, which is also sock weight, but it's I've knit socks out of it before, but it does not have any nylon. It's 100% wool, and yeah, it's all in Portuguese, so. But this sort of cookies and cream colorway was really speaking to me as a sweater. I wonder why. I can't imagine. I just buy the same things over and over again, apparently. So I just bought like 5 skeins of it, which is way more than you need, because I wanted to make sure I had enough. And I figured I would find things to do with the leftovers, like maybe baby garments or whatever, because I just love this yarn. I really loved working with it when I knit my socks out of it. And so then I looked on Ravelry again, trying to think about something that would be simple enough that the yarn wouldn't get lost, the color of the yarn, the sort of speckles that are going on. And I think what it might want to be is a gable by Hannah Fettig, which is this really lovely, simple sweater that I've had in my favorites for a while. And then another thing that this yarn could be, but I actually think the speckles probably wouldn't show it off to its best extent, so I probably would use something else. But I have been really wanting to make the Hilda Bear shawl, which is by Fiber Tales. I have been in love with it since she's been sharing her design process on her show a while back, and it's finally available. It's actually been available since I think just before the holidays. But that is something that is just spectacularly beautiful and completely has my heart. So I don't have yarn for it because I don't think it's going to be the Mondim. But if I'm feeling like it's the thing that I want to work on, then I will probably buy some Brooklyn tweed and make it happen. Either in a gray, which will probably be the most practical color in terms of wearing it a lot, or a kind of burnt orangey something, because it kind of feels like it wants to be that. So yeah, we'll see. So let's see, I think that's actually all I have. Are you exhausted yet? Thank you for joining me, guys, so much. And yeah, let me know what you think about all those thoughts around the future of the show. I don't want to scare you with any of that. I'm not going anywhere. And hopefully nothing that you like about the show will be going away. I just want to be honest about sort of the evolution of my knitting life right now, and I want the show to be an authentic representation of that. And I think that what I'm doing in my knitting should always influence what the show looks like and not the other way around. It's definitely not the other way around. So there's that. But yeah, let me know, especially if you have any interest or if you don't have interest in seeing other creative endeavors in that kind of green bean style way, possibly. And yeah, lots of love to you. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.